Well, hello. This is Kurt Doolittle from the Natural Law Institute. I've got our favorite author, Luke Weinhagen, here, and we're going to do chapter 4 of his book, Lift Up Your Book.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Lift Up Your Book, the Primal Primer. We're going through a chapter by chapter discussion. The link to buy the book it will be in the comments below. I was actually having a little fun here beforehand because we're warming up. Why? Because I was on a business meeting beforehand and my head is in business. So I had to talk to Luke and become regrounded in reality. Usually he's pretty funny, makes fun of me and stuff like that. Today he's all business. So we're going to talk about his favorite subject. Now, Luke, can you tell this situational awareness is and what you teach just before we get into this chapter?
Right. So I'm a certified situational awareness instructor. What that means is I've gone through specific training to be able to teach certain methodologies that contribute to our ability to navigate any environment, no matter the risks or threats or challenges that exist in those environments, right? So it's really about identifying and assessing potential risks and being able to respond rather than have to react to those risks. It was developed, the material that I train, it was birthed out of the Marine Corps' Combat Hunter program, which was their combat zone situational awareness program, right? The guy who started the business that I got certified through, his name is Yosef Badu. He was one of the long-term instructors of the Combat Hunter program, and he started his own business called Emergence Disrupt. And what they do is that he created a civilian adaptation of the Marine Corps' Combat Hunter program, and then it teaches people like me how to teach that material to organizations, individuals, and things like that. So that's one of the things I do professionally is I teach that skill set to churches, schools, businesses, anybody that has any kind of public facing interaction in the course of their doing business, right? So I teach their staff how to the skill set of situational awareness so that they can recognize the kind of stuff that we're going to talk about today, and two, behavioral analysis so they can get out ahead of things happening. We call it in the industry, we want to develop a capacity for being left of bang. Bang is that bad event. Bang is that significant action that non-pleasant experience that happens. We often focus on it being a kinetic threat, like an attack, a bombing, things like that. That's where we often focus our attention. But it could be anything. It could be a pissed off customer that's about to lose their mind. It could be, it could be a fight in your relationship that you want to get out in front of rather than have to react to after it happens, right? We don't want that bang event to roll over top of us, right? That's why we use that term. We don't want that would put us, we read from left to right, right? So being right of bang means you're reacting to it. It means that it's already happened, and now we have to figure out what to do next. We have to call call the emergency services or deal with the trauma and all those kinds of things. What we want to do is develop a competence to be left of bang, left of the negative consequence producing event. Right, left of the kinetic event, right. So we're reading the signals and cues and signs from the environment and all the people in the environment that are alerting us to the emerging threat, whether it's short-term or long-term, so that we can take action. We can respond to those cues and signals instead of having to react to the event itself, right? So we can get out in front of it. We can interject. We can get out of there. We can avoid it altogether if that's the best course of action. We can de-escalate. We can defuse. We can get out in front of the argument rather than having to have the argument. If we can start recognizing.
So you're, of course, I just want to read it. This is taught by the military. It's taught by protection services, bodyguards. It's taught by in intelligence. Most of the people in intelligence that do this kind of stuff come over from the military where they've learned it already. Right. But it should be taught even for security guards. But truthfully, what Luke is trying to make the point, I think, and I'm going to put this in your mouth so you can clarify it, yes. Is that in order to not be this isn't an act of paranoia. It's one of those things like if you teach somebody how to use a gun 3 times, right? If you go to three training sessions with somebody, it's like 80% of what you got to know, right, is learned in those few times. You can refine it, but you're not incompetent any longer, right? And so when I hear you talking about this, I'm like, well, the problem with a lot of people is they're just not competent in their emergency situations. And so they're victims rather than they have agency. Is that the point you're trying to get
Yeah,
across?
there's a few things that I think this contributes to, in some pretty significant ways. That's definitely one of them. You don't want to be the victim. You want to be able to assert yourself on even an ambush, even a confrontation, right? You want to have the confidence to do that. Some of the other areas where I see this in play is because we focus this kind of thing on training military and first responders and that kind of thing, but we don't think of this as just a skill for everybody.
A
And we ought
basic
to
life skill.
think of it, yeah, as a basic life skill. Because what is this doing us? It's teaching us how to recognize and interpret threat, right? If we can't recognize and interpret threat, then we lose things like an ability to proportionately respond to the nature of the threat. We lose proportionality if we never train and develop the skill set of recognizing threat, right? And that's the first step in being able to respond to threat, is to be able to recognize it, right? And depending on what research you're looking at, somewhere between 60 and 70% of all human communication is nonverbal. We spend hours and hours and hours in English classes learning grammars, learning vocabulary, learning sentence structure, and all that.
I like that framing a lot. That's really good.
We spend no time learning the language of nonverbal communication formally. We spend no training on it. We don't learn how to evaluate stances, postures, any of that kind of in a formal setting like we do with the spoken word or the written word, right? So we're losing 60 to 70% of our ability to communicate.
Now that framing that's like saying, well, I was taught personality analysis, IQ guessing, and guessing IQ, and body language, right?
Yeah.
So it's like saying that, right? I mean, now the thing I'm listening on behalf of the audience, I'm saying, but Luke, I want to live in a world of balloons and ice cream and confetti. That's what I want to think about when I walk around, because that's my happy place. I mean, why would I want to add more stress to my life by walking around life, being aware, being conscious of all the potential threats? I know it sounds stupid to even ask the question, but it's actually what I would think an awful lot of people would actually react with.
Right, absolutely. And I do get that reaction from people out, even, a lot of times when I'm talking to people on Twitter and stuff like that, that is the response. Like, I don't want to know that all these threats exist. How does that benefit me? If I'm going to just be stressed out about it all the time, right? And when you start learning this stuff, that's absolutely true. Your initial start point is going to be one of stress, right? But as you develop the skill and competence, that stress gets replaced by a confidence and a relaxed readiness rather than a state of anxiety and stress, right? But the big thing that I'm getting to in this book is that you are already under negative influence and negative consequences because of your lack of awareness of these things. You're not recognizing them because you've internalized them, you've normalized them, but you're in a state of perpetual anxiety because you don't possess the skill set. Right. Or even worse than that, because you are suppressing a skill set that is based on instincts and evolved capabilities. Our brains are picking up on all of those signals from our environments all the time. They're never not picking up on those signals. And we evolved to pick up on a lot of very small details from the people in our environments and from all the objects in our environments and all that kind of thing. That's it. The people that lived could do that, right? Our ancestors that survived could do that. We wouldn't be here if they couldn't do that, right? So we're already taking in all of that information, right? But we've gotten to a point where we're conditioning ourselves to ignore or dismiss a lot of that information so that we can have.
Well, you're getting too far ahead here.
Sure.
So here the example I use is, people ask me. I mean, this person asked me this a long time ago, and I looked up the data on it, and it's very interesting. She said, when I get in a bus, right, I just feel it. Right, whether it's safe or not. And she says, and I was sitting there in the back of the bus, not the back, some way toward the back of the bus, and I knew something was going to happen. This has got to be sixth sense. Actually, it turns out that people's breathing changes, and you're not even aware that you hear it, right? Because you've learned to ignore it, right? And the number of fidget movements they make changes, or the fidget movements they make are synchronized, right? Now, you don't process that information, but you're the victim of it because you don't know how to process it. And so I think what's important is that the point you're trying to make is that we are going to detect a lot of things in the world that we are the victims of unless we have the tools to understand and evaluate them.
Right.
And the more nervous you are in the first place, the worse that lack of ordering and filtering that information becomes.
Right.
And the
And the more dysfunctions emerge because of that lack of
Right.
ability to filter and process the information.
Right. So
Right? I mean,
this is, I want to say, can I say this? But are you trying to teach us emotional intelligence?
I am. I'm trying to teach you emotional intelligence, emotional regulation, the regulation of your attention. What the way I frame it, what I call it, this package that we're talking about right now, is I call it limbic fitness. It's your perceptual fitness, right? All of this stuff is processed first by our limbic system, right? It goes through the amygdala and all that kind of stuff, and it gets sent from there. It gets sent to emotional centers, and that's where we have our fear responses. That's where we have our anxiety production. Our fight, flight, freeze all gets produced out of our level of perceptual fitness. But we don't ever develop perceptual fitness. We're not doing it anymore.
The thing I want to, this is about your work that it just, it's so good, and it's just hard to make people understand that 99% of what we're taught is coping mechanism, not understanding mechanism.
Yes.
Right. And it leaves us, we're still powerless. We've just taken a numbing. We've injected ourselves with some kind of numbing agent, right?
Right.
But you're numb to the fear or the anxiety or the concern or the risk, and you sort of internalize it. And what I think was one of the things you bring up all the time is this sort of stuff accumulates like waste product in your psychological framework until you're basically stressed out all the time, and you don't know why the hell you're not. And so the thing I get, I understand what you do here, which is, I think, is genius, but I always feel like it's really easy to dismiss it when you say, here, I'm going to talk about this stuff. It's macho and the Marines do it and whatever.
Right.
No, it's not about that.
No.
It's that we know it's true because we've had these people work on this problem for a long time. But in other words, it's the science is done on this issue, right? We know how to train people into situational awareness,
right,
and we know how to make them calm and relaxed in all situations because they don't feel fearful, right? They feel aware maybe, but not fearful. And so I just think it's really, how do you get people over the bump of understanding that the reason we're talking about this stuff is specifically because you might be unaware of it, and that anxiety you have is because you feel powerless. Anyway, can you run with that a little bit? Because I want it to succeed. That's why.
So do I. Well, and it's even deeper than that, because we use words like fear and anxiety, and they're very appropriate and very accurate words to use, but we have such a negative perception of those emotions, those emotional states, right? When they're both very real and healthy emotions that we want, they're essential to our survival. Fear and anxiety are, right? So it's not. It's when we start using them as projections rather than as triggers for action where they become a problem. Right. Fear is a part of our, it means we're accurately reading a signal from the environment that would trigger fear. That's a healthy response.
The problem is threat. And we can, the threat is the issue. And then we can experience that as anxiety or fear. Right. So this is the problem. So the question is, these are reactions. The problem is, how do I evaluate whether the threat is real or not? How do I get ahead of the threat? Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so we say, is fear and anxiety useful? Well, I'm not sure. I think threat detection it's useful so that we have less fear and anxiety. I don't know if that's the right way to frame it.
The analogy I use with people is your emotions are your navigator, not your driver, not your pilot.
Yes.
Right. And so you want your emotions to be responding to those signals because that alerts you to a change in state, an external change in state. Right. And you want that capacity. right? But what you don't want is you don't want those emotions projecting themselves onto what you anticipate, onto a past memory, a past experience, or a potential future experience. You want them just as that response to a signal from your environment, right? At least these ones, these action triggering emotions, right? Like fear and anxiety, right? The example I use frequently is, if you're blindfolded, standing in the middle of the street and you can hear traffic, you ought to feel anxiety. That's a healthy state in that circumstance. But that should be triggering you to action. It should be triggering you to pull the blindfold off or walk away from the noise or something like that. It shouldn't be triggering you to think you're a terrible person because you found yourself in this situation that you don't know how to control, and all these other things to start layering on top of and making meaning
Yeah,
out of.
well, even then, your argument is that even if you're not aware of it, your body's sensing your sense
Yes.
perception.
Yeah.
Your senses are perceiving, your senses are acting to turn this into perception, but it's not escalating to the point of your awareness. It's just sitting down, like, you don't recognize that there's the water's dripping, in the bathroom on the other side of the house, and something's annoying you until you
Yes.
realize, oh, it's the water dripping, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a bit that in my mind, the argument I make is that that's the reason that anxiety has become the top mental health problem in the West. Right, we've never been safer, we've never been more comfortable, we've never had easier access to resources. Yet there's hundreds of millions of people on anxiety medications and going through therapy for anxiety problems, and it's because they're not using that anxiety as a navigational tool to identify where that disruption in their environment is.
When you're trying to get the baselines.
Right.
Okay, so does this get us to the introduction of the chapter, which is baseline versus anomaly, how not to get murdered? Okay, how do we go from baseline versus anomaly to how not to get murdered? That just seems like, I know what you're doing there. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, that's an attention getter line, but
Yeah.
So the example I use in here, the story example that I use in this chapter of the book is a violent confrontation with an attacker, right? And so if I wasn't prepared to have to face that confrontation, I could have reached the point where I didn't walk away from it, right? And so that's what the opening or the title of the chapter harkens to, is that's the story that I'm telling in this particular chapter, to use myself as the example of how to do this wrong. I do that a lot through the book. I'm the example of how to do this wrong. So
That's how you know these things, right?
right. Yeah. I learned most of them in ways I would rather have not learned them. I would have rather gotten them from my book.
Yeah. The willingness of all of us to believe we can figure out everything in the universe on our own, which of course I'm also guilty of, right? That when really what we need is somebody who's a generation older than us to tell us that, and then a generation older than that to tell us what they've learned at their stage. And we got to listen. I'll never forget my Uncle John telling me, you don't want to be 40 and say, I wish I had. And that, I don't know, I was like 17 when he said that. And it was like, I don't know, it was like, for some reason, it was like, ran in my brain.
Right.
And it might have just been the honesty and sincerity and personal context in which he said it.
Right. Yeah. So to get into this chapter here, and it's a lot of stuff like that, right? So as I brought up earlier, when we're talking about situational awareness, it in professionally, my mind and a lot of other people's minds jumps right to that immediate threat, that violent attack, that you get jumped on the subway or whatever. That's what we're aiming ourselves at with this learning, right? So, but in this chapter, I start off with the example of that friend of mine that committed suicide in high school. Right. And the reason I do that is because I want to reframe everybody's perception of what situational awareness means, to broaden it a bit. Right. Because the situation like that, I had signs and signals that emerged over time in his behavior, changes in his behavior, the things he was saying, the things he was doing. These were all signals that me, his parents, the teachers, any of us could have been picking up, but none of us had the developed skill set to recognize any of these things as changes from his normal behavior.
Yes.
Right. So when I'm talking about situational awareness, I'm not just talking about the stranger that's turning violent on the street. I'm talking about every day, all day, with the people we interact with the most. This was my best friend. I spent hours and hours of time with him every day. Right. And I wasn't picking up on these things because nobody ever taught me to to even look for them. Right. So, but that, when I'm talking about situational awareness, I really want people to understand that this isn't just limited to those threats. This is all interaction everywhere, all the time. This is all
But
environments
again, Luke,
everywhere, all the time.
I'm all concerned about myself. I don't care about anybody else. But Luke, I want to live in a world of posies and flowers and puppy dogs and kittens.
Yeah. And this is how we build that world.
Okay, so make that jump. I'm going to keep reinforcing this point.
Sure.
So, because it's it's counterintuitive. We only get to puppies and kittens if
so
we have
this is where I was going earlier too, right? So because we're in this perpetual state of anxiety, because we're operating with these dysfunctions manifesting because of our lack of competence in these areas, because of our ignorance in these areas, because we never developed these skill sets, we start to lose, just like we lose our ability to proportionality, we lose our ability to proportionally respond. We have that same dynamic with our interpersonal interactions, our relationships. We lose our ability to proportionally respond to what lands on us as threats. We're still picking up on all those signals, even from our life partners. We're picking up on all those signals, but we never learn how to identify, make a distinction between what's a threat and what's not a threat.
How come
Right?
my female significant others say I never pick up on anything?
Right. Well, there's that too. We've got some other resistances that are baked in as well. And even those, I think, might be improved by learning some of this stuff. I don't know. There's some nastiness in
I
there for us
never.
too. So.
Sorry, I just got to throw this in because
Yeah.
you brought it. I got to add some levity because that kind of upset me hearing about your friend there.
Yeah.
But what do you do when it's like 2:00 in the morning and your Russian wife pulls out the fucking kitchen knife, which has happened.
Right. And
this, I didn't see that coming.
Right. But that's the thing. You did. You just didn't know you saw it coming, right? You weren't picking up on the signs that this is somebody you knew really well. You knew them intimately, right? I mean, you could probably pick up on a lot of their nonverbal communication, right? So it probably, at some level, it wasn't as a surprise to you as you're
No, it wasn't, but it was a great humorous thing of, how do I handle this? Okay, I'm in an unexpected situation, but how do I handle it? But anyway.
Right. But just going back to the balloons and puppy dogs and stuff like that, right? This stuff that we're learning isn't just about navigating threats. It's about navigating to win-win out of every engagement that we have with people. It means that when we're communicating with each other, we're doing communication fully. We're not just doing the verbal part of communication. We're doing the entire expression and experience of communication. We're reading all of the signals, all the signs, all the cues, all the body languages. We're being honest with each other in ways that are not possible without this developing these competence.
Okay, right? So now I think I was trying to get what I was worried about in this chapter is I want to get to this point where people are not reacting to, I don't want to live in, and they understand that the way you get to puppies and kittens, it's the way you'd get to everything else is you remove all the bads and only the goods remain. And the way you remove the bads, of course, is you're aware of them. If you don't, it's like, how do we get rid of disease around the turn of the century? It was fucking running water, running well in our sewage systems and soap and water, right? I mean, we started cleaning people up and all of a sudden people stopped getting tuberculosis and everything else, right? Well, you do the good by eliminating the bad. And so if we can get over that hump, which was my primary concern at the beginning of the chapter, now let's start working through the topics you got. Sure. Because I think if I've convinced myself we've gotten there, then I've probably gotten the audience there. So all right, go ahead.
All right. So
what's baselines versus an now? What I won't direct you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So where I was going with all of that was that, so in general, and most of the time, our behavior is consistent and predictable, and a lot of that is because our needs are the same, right? Our basic needs are basic fundamental human needs, right? Our need for food, water, protection from elements, our need for relationship, all those things are the same, right? We have the same needs at a basic level, at a foundational level, right? Mm-hmm. So the behaviors that manifest because of those needs, or that are expressed in the pursuit of those needs, are very consistent across all people, right? Mm-hmm. We start layering culture and stuff on top of that, but underneath all that, the expression of the underlying behaviors are very similar, right? But both at a biological level and at a an expressive behavioral level, right? I mean, our bodies react certain ways when we go without need, when our needs aren't being met, right? We can see physical changes in the body. We can see, you know, when you're angry, your blood starts changing how it flows, right? Your face gets red, your extremities get lighter, things like that. As we have vasodilation and vasoconstriction and stuff like that, we see physiological changes in the body in response to how we're interacting with our needs or threats or things like that. But we also see behavioral changes that are consistent in the pursuit of needs. Right? But all that is just to say that behavior is consistent and predictable. Right? That's what norms represent. That's what
Yeah,
most
well,
of our
let me state that differently. Is
Sure.
uh, that what we're, as human beings, at the base of the Maslowian pyramid, really even all the way up, we're marginally indifferent in how we respond to state. In other words, state. Now, what state we're in varies a great deal, right?
Mhm.
Across, and our capacity to act within that state is very, because we're younger, we're older, whatever. And some of us are more on the weaker side, and some of the stronger, so that those base things become less and more sensitive, right? But we call this marginal indifference. In other words, none of us are so different that we can't understand someone else,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And so when you look at that, there are basic traits across all people that will always manifest in the animal's display, word, and deed, right? Okay. So what does baseline versus anomaly mean?
All right. So baseline represents all of the things that you expect to be there, all the things that you experience or training or any other element that you bring to the table creates the picture that you expect to exist in whatever experience you're having. It's the environmental variables that you expect to be there. It's the behavioral variables you expect to be there. It's the people that themselves in that environment that you expect to be there. So it's everything that goes into making your expectation of that environment or of that situation that you find yourself in. Right, that is your baseline. Okay, so the example I use in the book is the coffee shop. You walk into a coffee shop and you want to identify what the baseline is for a coffee shop, right? There's certain expectations that have proven themselves to be consistent for you, right, through your experience at coffee shops. Right, you're going to hear beans being grinded. You're going to hear coffee, being brewed. You're going to see people in line waiting to order their coffee. You're going to see employees behind the counter taking the orders and dealing with the drive-through windows and all that kind of stuff. There's very consistent behavior you expect to experience in a coffee shop. You're going to see people sitting at tables having conversations and things like that, right? So this is what I mean when I'm talking about we're setting a baseline for our experience or our environment or our interaction, right? We walk in and we start to define a baseline for that
So what's
scenario.
normal, what's
Yeah.
habitual, what's regular,
Right.
what's ordinary, right?
Right. And from the broader frame that we operate from, right, we also include things like norms in there. Right, norms are part of a baseline for any
Sure.
kind of social interaction, right? So we don't expect to walk into a coffee shop, at least in the US, and see people standing there without clothes on. Right, that wouldn't represent.
I
But in
might
some
go to
places,
that one.
right, right. Well, it depends on what
Well, it
kind of
depends on
clientele
who's
they serve.
standing there. Most people don't look very good naked.
Right. Right. So that's what we mean by baseline, and we want to develop a skill set to quickly identify what the baseline is for any interaction, for any environment, for any situation. Right. And it's just a constant state of developing the ability to recognize what are the expectations, what are the norms, what is normal for this situation.
Okay, so I'm gonna just science this a bit and say,
Yeah.
I mean, the brain basically accumulates regularities,
Hmm.
right? And so we're really good at identifying regularities. But the reason the brain notices anything is because it's a novelty. And so this goes right, in other words, the reason we notice things is because there's something different about them,
Right.
right? Not because there's something ordinary about them. And this is the form how all episodic memory is formed, is not the identification of a novelty. That's why you don't remember the 8 hours of the day in the coffee shop where it was absolutely boring, but you remember the one asshole customer that drove you nuts. I told the Dunkin' Donuts people this morning I would go to fire their customer if they let me go, if they held him in the line long enough because the guy was being rude. Anyway, my bit of civil service today, it made the girls laugh hard anyway.
Right.
Anyway, so the brain identifies novelty. The thing is, novelties can be very loud. I've got a gun in your face, or novelties can be just a very whisper, quiet change in behavior that you. It's like the nervous guy at a line. You can
Right.
tell something's wrong.
Yep.
Right. Or just
Yeah.
the misbehavior, or when the girl says, "My sister was great at this. He's creepy." He probably is a problem because she's fucking 12 and she's just one of those girls. And that guy's creepy. What is she noticing? He's just behaving oddly, right?
Right.
Right. So how do you so there's baseline there's baseline anomaly, or there's habit or regularity,
Yeah.
and novelty. And when a novelty or anomaly arises, how do you train yourself to look for subtleties rather than, because by the time he sticks a gun in your face, you haven't got ahead of the problem.
Right, exactly. Well, and one of the big things that I focus on with people, and what the training focuses on, is you're developing of the baseline. It can't stay an unconscious process, right? You have to approach it the same way we approach all the other problems that we face. It has to be a process of continuous recursive disambiguation of your current state. Is how you're describing, is how I would describe setting a baseline,
Of course.
right? And so it's never a disengaged process; it's an active process.
Can I ask that?
Yeah.
I know the way I do it. It's just I've been doing my whole, because for reasons, my own reasons, I've been doing it for my whole life, right? I can't stop myself. So you're saying it's always that, or it'll eventually turn, if you make it a conscious process, it'll become an unconscious process.
Yeah, you make it right now. It's an unconscious, ignorant process. We want it to be an unconscious, informed process.
Informed process. Okay, I got
right.
it.
And that's the big distinction here. Is we have to practice it, so it has to be conscious long enough for it to be an informed process. But then it will start to slip into being an unconscious, informed process. And that's where we want to get. But first, we have to break out of our unconscious, ignorant process. So that's what the training and the practice of it starts to become. So, but you segued perfectly the concept of the anomaly, right? The anomaly is any deviation from what you expect in that situation or environment or interaction, right? And when we're looking for big or small, any kind of deviation, what we're looking for,
I'm not going anywhere. I'm out of water.
Yep. So the big thing that we want to pay attention to here is that deviations, the anomalies, and I use the term anomaly rather than any specific term, because it's not limited to just human behavior. It could be an environmental anomaly or anything else that deviates from the expectations, right? But the important thing to know here is they can be above the baseline or they can be below the baseline, right? So an anomaly above a baseline means something has been added to the environment that is not expected to be there, or that's unusual to be there, that breaks the baseline by being added. An anomaly that falls below the baseline means something is missing or has been removed from the environment that we would expect to be in that environment. I mentioned earlier that in the States here, if you walk into a coffee shop and people are standing there naked, that would be something removed from the baseline, right? Their clothes are missing. Their clothes have been removed from the baseline that we would expect to experience in a coffee shop. That would be an anomaly that falls below our baseline, right? And that's the distinction we make between the different types of anomalies, right? But the anomaly itself is just any deviation from the baseline.
Okay, you use the word deviation, naked, coffee shop, removing clothes. I'm getting a very interesting sort of framework for thinking about variations here. So
there's a lot of deviance going on.
So you've got how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you've got a baseline, which is what's normal or habitual or whatever. You've got anomaly, something that's different from that baseline.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a relevance, which is can you explain relevance first?
Sure. I'm going to do context first, and then we'll hit relevance after context. Right. So this is not a snapshot. We can't approach this like it's a snapshot in time. This is an ever evolving process, right? Because your environment's changing all the time, right? So as you've defined a baseline, then you start to recognize, because you're getting good at defining a baseline, you're starting to recognize anomalies. You're getting better and better at recognizing anomalies because your clarity for the baseline is improving, right? So then what starts to happen is you have to start applying context to those anomalies. Right. Again, going back to my coffee shop example, if you walk into the coffee shop and the person behind the counter is wearing a clown suit, that would be an anomaly, right? Something was added, the costume was added to the environment, right? So it doesn't fit our baseline anymore. So then we have to filter that anomaly through context. Is it Halloween? And if the context says yes, it's Halloween, then suddenly because of the context fit, we have to add that anomaly back into our baseline. We have to feed that anomaly back into our baseline. Right. So now that anomaly is not an anomaly anymore. It's just part of our baseline because of the context filter. Right. Whereas if it was the middle of the summer, and it's super hot outside and the air conditioner's, not working in the coffee shop, the guy standing there in a full costume, the context wouldn't filter that one out. You would have to maintain that as an anomaly. Right. So the context is a filter that'll either send an anomaly back into the baseline or keep it out of the baseline as an anomaly. So it's what the context filter does, right? So once your anomaly, and this all happens really quickly, right? We're developing a really quick process here, but once it passes through context, then you have to apply the relevance filter, right? So relevance is, can the anomaly itself be removed from active evaluation or not, or do you have to maintain it as part of your assessment for threats or bad things happening in the environment, right? So even if the anomaly doesn't update your baseline and it stays an anomaly, it is the anomaly itself relevant or not? I put a note in here for myself to just use the example of like a baby crying, right? So if you're in that same coffee shop or on an airplane or something and you hear a baby start crying, right, that would represent an anomaly, right? Now, even passing through context, that's still not a normal experience for that environment, so it would stay an anomaly, right? But let's say relevance is you look over and you see the mother responding to the baby crying. So then relevance says that's not an anomaly I need to keep on my radar, right? But if that baby crying persists and you don't see anybody responding to it, then relevance wouldn't kick that anomaly out of your threat assessment for the environment, right? That would the anomaly would still register as significant to what may be a problem in the environment, right? If the baby just cries and cries and cries and cries and cries and nobody's responding to it, then that relevance changes, right? So then the anomaly still exists, but whether it's relevant or not to your assessment is the relevance filter, right? Whether it applies or not to your assessment of risk in that environment is the relevance filter. So there's a couple of filters that every anomaly goes through, and it either updates the baseline or it gets, then you decide whether or not to write the anomaly off out of your assessment, out of your threat assessment. Are the two big
in your
pieces.
book? I don't remember. Do you have any example? Do you go through examples? More
Yeah.
examples? Okay. It's funny because the way I do this is I look at every person as, what could I say to that person that would be funny, complimentary, or concerned?
Right.
And it's just how I naturally look at everybody, right? And I got that from sales, right? Doing sales, but it forces you to look at every single person as some. And what happens is, if it causes you to be concerned, there's a difference of concern for them or concern for you.
Right.
So I get it. Okay. So the one I didn't understand in this list is sirens.
Yeah. So the next one. So what I did in our notes are a little bit different than how the book is laid out. So context and relevance are just part of the discussion of defining baselines and anomalies. Right. And then there's a few sections in the book here where I go into some specific examples of how that kind of lands on us as we move through our days. And one of those specific examples.
I need to ask a dumb question. I assume that these are terms that are familiar in the industry.
The sirens and scams and stuff. No,
No.
those are mine. But
baseline, anomaly, context.
Yeah, context and relevance.
Okay. That's why I mean, like they sound like they came out of the military.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's okay. I got that. Okay.
That's an industry specific vernacular, but it's a neutral vernacular, and that's why we use it. So
okay. I just like I would have done this like in ordinary language, but now I get why it matches that thing. Okay, got it. So sirens, explain sirens.
Yeah. Well, just one quick note on that. The reason I don't change language is because I'm going to use this same vocabulary throughout the rest of the book.
I
This,
get it.
this just concept here is kind of a foundational concept for a lot of the material that happens later.
I
in the
see.
book.
I see.
So,
Okay, got it. Well, then somebody else who runs into that will understand that
yeah,
my question, and
absolutely.
the answer will be solved for them.
So these are just some of the examples I use in the book, right? So sirens is an anomaly that a lot of us experience fairly frequently, right? We're driving down the road and we hear the sirens and see the flashing lights and stuff behind us, right? We've encountered it enough, and it's even part of, for at least in when I learned how to drive, it's part of the law, and part of the teaching of driving accounts for this anomaly, right? This disruption in the normal experience of driving, right? So there's an anomaly that's officially recognized by law in this case, right? So you hear the sirens behind you. What do most of us do? We get out of the way. We pull off to the side of the road so the emergency vehicle can get through the center lane or whatever it is, right? Things like that. And we just we've gotten to the point where we just kind of dismiss it. Right?
Yes.
So this is a good example of an anomaly that we all recognize, that we all are confronted with on a frequent basis, but it's also an anomaly that we all just conditioned ourselves to dismiss. We respond to it, briefly, and then we dismiss it. Right. So that's the point of that section there. I'm just, again, these are just kind of examples.
So, okay, now I get it. That's what I didn't understand. So the four things are baseline, anomaly, context, and relevance.
Yes.
And then sirens, and the other next ones are examples. Okay.
Yeah. They're just
So the next
subsections
one is
of this chapter.
That's why I didn't get it. So scams.
Yeah. Scams, right? So these are the too good to be true anomalies, right? These are social interaction anomalies, right?
Mhm.
So these kind of anomalies play into our egos and our fears, and become challenging to spot if we're not actively practicing situational awareness, right? So
Yep.
again, this is just another example where I'm saying situational awareness doesn't just apply to the kinetic threat. The situational awareness applies to all of our interactions, right? If something is coming across our desk or coming across our experience and it doesn't match a baseline, it's an anomaly. Right. So all of these phishing emails, all of these, get rich quick programs, all that kind of thing, do they really match a baseline that you've ever established? Probably not. So then you have to look at them and evaluate them as an anomaly. Right. And I use an example in here of a family member that didn't do that to some pretty significant negative consequences. So, and then of course you can't have a good book without talking about sex a little bit. So this has to be in here as well.
Of course.
And there's a lot of baselining and anomaly detection that goes into the mating process that we're not doing very well. Right. So I call this the wolf in sheep's clothing anomaly, right? So the threats that try to make themselves out to not be threats. It's very common with the longer term threats, right? With the deception threats and things like that, where they're trying to use the environment, right? If you're out in a bar or something, they're trying to use the fact that you're at a bar to mask their intent. They're trying to use our biological responses against us to compromise our ability to assess anomalies, things like that, right? So we talked quite a bit about novelty so far. People tend to perk up when novelties present themselves, right? So these wolf in sheep's clothing, they will use that. They'll try to become novel, try to key into what you find novel, and then slot themselves into those novelties, so that you're more apt to intake them as novelties, right? So
it just reminds me of, it's really easy to, I don't know, I just find it really easy to spot a scam. But if somebody turns around and you say, here, I have 2 extra tickets, can you use them? And you say, I suppose, right? And you take them, and that's not, but the minute there's a conversation going on, but I always think about I have when I lived in Ukraine, I have a very soft spot in my heart for ththese little old babushkas running around with their farm goods, right? And they sell the stuff they grow, their turnips and their onions or whatever. So every once in a while, I just give them, the equivalent of $5 or $10. And to them, they were always wondering what I wanted. And I would just say, it's for you, me, and God. Right. Or it was I would say, or it's for you, me, God, and my soul. Right. And they still just can't believe anybody would care about them enough to randomly pick them. So, anyway, the point is that not all novelties are bad.
No, that's exactly the point I was going to make here is that, I'm talking a lot about anomalies representing threat or
Threats,
representing
yes.
bad things or whatever. It's not the case. Anomaly just means deviation from baseline. It doesn't mean a negative deviation from baseline or anything else. It just means something is different than what you expect to be there. So you need to take note of it.
Yep.
Is all we mean by anomaly, right? And the better you get at that, the easier it's going to become, and the more you're going to pick up on. And then threat detection becomes easier because you're picking up on all anomalies. You're getting better at picking up on all deviations from those baselines. Changes.
So you're actually saying something pretty simple here, which is, in other words, know what it is. There's a normal state of things. Any deviation is something to think about. You can then when you find something, you can that you can filter through context and filter through relevance, right?
Yep.
And that's actually a pretty, that's 4 steps. I mean, even I can do that.
Yeah.
So, now, the next section you have is about situational awareness and practice.
Yes.
Now, what does that mean?
So this is where so first I define all of these steps, right? That's what the whole first section is. Now I start to get talking about how we really have to start consciously applying these things in order to get good at them. Right? We can't just be ignorant about them. We can't just be dismissive about them.
You have to practice anything.
These things. So what's that?
You have to practice anything. Walking on stilts,
Right.
Singing a song.
Yep. Yeah. So this is where I start to invite or ask the reader to start really re-engaging with their environment around them as they move through it. Right. Start paying a little more attention to what's going on around you. Restore that natural curiosity. Right. Wonder why this is happening. When you notice something in your environment, wonder why that thing's happening. Look at the people in your environment and just be curious about them. Why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they moving the way they're moving? Why are they interacting the way they're interacting? What are they doing? What's motivating them? Right? Just start being curious about the things around you. Again, get off your damn phone. Don't walk around with your face plastered to your phone. Right? That's you disengage.
I think I've said this before. I watch accident videos before I fall asleep at night. I don't know why it works for me. It just breaks the contact the rest of the day. The number of chicks that get run over because they're looking in their phones every day. It's like it's become it's got to show up in statistics soon.
Right. Well, and that's the big thing I'm looking at in this section of the book here is I don't want you walking around in a state of hypervigilance, looking for anything, interpreting everything as a threat. What I want you to be is curious. What I want you to be is observant. I want you just paying attention to what's going on around you.
Curiosity is a great frame.
Yeah, absolutely. So the more natural curiosity you can develop in yourself, the better you're going to get at threat detection.
Great.
And the better you're going to get at interaction.
You're also going to indirectly learn more about the world than you would if you weren't.
Yeah. Again, just like our last conversation, there's a lot of, wax on, wax off stuff in here. There's a lot of indirect learning that comes out of developing these skill sets. So it plays a big role. You mentioned sales earlier. This all should be part of sales training.
Yeah.
All of this stuff. So
I think it should be part of life training.
Right. Yeah. So once we have our natural curiosity restored, then I get into what I call the threat decision equations, right? So you spot an anomaly and it's significant to you. So now what do you do with it? Right. And this is where I get into that fundamental equation that we use in the industry. That's baseline plus anomaly equals decision. Right. And this is kind of what you have to train yourself to get in the habit of. This is just a habit equation, right? Baseline plus anomaly equals decision. So anytime you've set a baseline and you recognize an anomaly or something that deviates from that baseline, you have to make a decision. Now that decision, what goes into that decision is that context, is that relevance, but it's also, is it time to act, right? We always want to be biasing ourselves towards action, right? So this decision is really just to get the reader to be actively, consciously thinking about, okay, I have a baseline, I recognize an anomaly, I have to make a decision. I have a baseline, I recognize an anomaly, I have to make a decision. And I use it over and over again throughout the book because I really want them focused on this is a decision-making process.
So this is something I had curious about. So what you're doing here is you're setting up, tell them what you're going to tell them with examples, tell them what you told them.
Yes.
So which is the basic educational model for everything, right?
Over and over again.
And so we're going through this and I'm like, okay, how am I going to remember this? But this is just I'm going to tell you about this. This
Yep.
is giving you the framework. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And so this is how we start to get into just the rote memorization of it, right? This is what it breaks down to. It's just baseline plus anomaly equals decision.
Like knowing
Right.
your basic definitions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Like any new concept, there's just some groundwork that has to be done before you can really start pushing the concept itself, right? But the other reason I like that this equation is because it shows that eventually this becomes a very simple process, right? It feels complex while you're learning it. It feels like there's a lot of moving pieces, but it just breaks down to baseline plus anomaly equals decision.
Yeah, I get it.
Right. And then the next one is just kind of
I'm trying to be warm and fuzzy. I know, but I think about the people who don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to handle objections, and
Yeah.
I'm like, look, be curious, right?
Yeah.
Walk around life, be curious, which is basically situational awareness. And there's normal stuff, the stuff that's not normal. If something, the trick is that some abnormal things are quite subtle and some abnormal things are not. I think most situational awareness requires being aware of, I'm not sure this is coming across here, the things that are more subtle, right? Rather than the things that are, don't wait till they're obvious.
Yeah.
Be curious, so don't wait till they're obvious, which is you mean by get ahead of them.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, and in later chapters we get into very very specific tools to use to start picking up on the less and less obvious signals from the environment. That's what a lot of the rest of the training is under the topic of situational awareness, is those specific methodologies, those specific tool sets to start picking up on what those real subtle cues are. And, there's whole fields that explore each one of them in detail. Sure. So and we go into some of those.
Oh, now you got me really freaking interested.
And one of the big things in this section that I introduce is we start to talk about clumping of cues or clumping of anomalies, right? So let's say you run into an anomaly and it doesn't quite meet the threshold of something you need to respond to in your decision making process. But if you get to 2 or 3 anomalies in an environment, you need to do something in that environment. You need to take an action. You need to either get yourself out of there. You need to create an anomaly yourself so that you can push what's causing the anomalies to manifest or emerge or something. You need to do something. You need to take some sort of action in that environment once you've hit at least 3 anomalies in an environment, right? We really want to start building that at the same time as we're building the competence. We want to start building our bias towards action when we're doing our situational awareness, right? So that's why I introduced in here the rule of 3, right? So if you hit 3 anomalies, do something. Your decision has to be about what you're going to do, not do I keep looking for more anomalies, right? So but we want to cluster our anomalies, right? We also don't want to be, the hair trigger. We don't want to go off on every single anomaly. We want to make sure we're applying context and relevance and stuff like that. So there's really, there's nuance in here that you have to play with as you develop the skill set. Right. But the big thing to take away from that is if you're hitting multiple anomalies, if you're hitting a clump or a cluster of cues or signals from your environment, there's something going on there that you need to get away from or suss out.
But you cover this later in the book, right? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is primal situational awareness?
All right. So we go back, the primal situational awareness. This is where I bring back the conversation, or bring back the concept of we evolved to do this kind of thing, right? This is not like some strange new skill set that we're introducing to humanity.
This is restoration of bringing us back to basic human behavior.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this stuff that we're talking about here, it's how we reach the top of the food chain. Right. I mean, we're able to project in ways that no other creature is able to project, but we can only do that because of our ability to observe the baselines that we're observing. Right. Our ability to project is a form of active creation of anomaly on a baseline. Right. Yes. We're baseline hunters. We don't scent track our food, right? No. We're not picking up on actual physical particles in the air. Our noses aren't sensitive enough to do that. We're not visual hunters like a lot of other animals are. What we are is baseline hunters. We know the behaviors of our prey. We hunt them based on their behavior, right? So we're baseline. I think
that's
hunters.
That's other great framing. Thank you. That's really good.
Yeah. So I mean, it's truly what humans evolved to do, is be the world's top baseline establishers. Right? That's
It's such an advantage over
right.
everything else.
Right.
And besides, I don't understand that animals that smell the world. A lot of the world doesn't smell very good.
Yeah. No.
Anyway,
I live with small children. I'm aware.
All right. So what's next?
So just a little bit more on that the primal situation awareness, right? So that means we have to become the predator, but what we're hunting is not prey so much as we're hunting anomalies. We're actively searching for them. We're going
I
back
like
to
that framing too.
that
Hunting
active mindset,
for
that active
anomalies.
hunter. Right.
Curiosity, hunting for anomalies. Beautiful.
Yeah. And we want to be able to, as we're building our level, our accumulation of experience, we want to spend some time thinking like the bad guys. How are they looking at this environment? What are they looking at this environment, and what opportunities are they seeing? Right? What anomalies in here are they going to exploit? Because that's going to alert us and start teaching us to look for those anomalies.
Yeah.
Right. And then of course, if you're practicing this primal situational awareness, you're not dismissing anomalies. All of them stay on your radar until a relevance filter is passed. They don't just get dismissed without doing anything with them. You hold them until you pass them through context and relevance, and then you decide what to do with them. You're the agent of the anomalies, right?
So, like, when I was a young guy and managing a shop, if somebody I thought was a theft risk, was going to shoplift, I would just find another person and we'd just stock the shelves wherever they were, and then wherever they moved, we'd start a conversation over there or whatever. I mean, it just, you just become aware of you can make threats go away by decreasing it, but there's other times when you got to you're in a bar and you've got a ceramic coffee cup is my weapon of choice, because
Right.
bottles are illegal, but it turns out that coffee cups tend to be not be illegal. So stand behind a guy with a ceramic coffee cup because you think he's going to get a hand, and then when he's gone, when the threat is over, and you put the coffee cup down.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. This whole section is really just to harken back to, this is a very natural state for humans to be in. This defining or establishing baselines, recognizing anomalies, making decisions, defining baselines, and it just cycles through, right? You just keep reiterating you're redefining your baseline over and over and over again, just so you can keep picking up on.
Can everybody do this?
What's that? Can
everybody do it?
And I think everyone that doesn't have an actual physical handicap can do this stuff. This is we have to learn it now because we trained ourselves away from it, but we would have just learned this in the same way that we learned walking.
Yeah.
Right. We wouldn't have had to take classes on learning situational awareness because nature would kill us if we didn't have it.
So it's like you can train women to be cops. You can train them to, there's plenty of women. I was thinking about the women I know that are goofy. Yeah, they can learn this stuff. That's no problem.
Yeah.
It is, especially if it's their job, right?
Right.
But okay.
And in my framing, I genuinely believe that most of this stuff should be well set by the time we're 10, 11, 12 years old. So long before the significant changes or distinctions between male and female start really emerging.
You want to just go, I learned this by natural environment because I'm old enough that we used to just punch each other in the face all the time.
Right. Yeah.
And I learned this stuff like, you just had to be, because that's what life was like in the 60s.
Well, and a lot of the way I'm presenting this stuff is because I saw in my own kids and their peers and the way they're interacting with each other, they're not learning this stuff. That's why the reason I have to break it down to the point where I break it down to is because they're just not being exposed to any of this in their life. It's not part of their experience as they navigate the world. So there's truly an abandoned skill set that we didn't even recognize we abandoned it in making our world as safe as we have.
It's one thing abandoning it. It's one other thing of boxing. You're putting yourself in a cage you don't realize.
Exactly. And that's because we didn't recognize that this got abandoned. They're putting themselves in a cage that they don't even know they're putting themselves in. Right. The sequence is understandable and recognizable, and you can kind of get why it happens, but it has to be disrupted. The dysfunctions that are emerging are crazy, right? So that's primal situational awareness. Now the reason we're developing all this is to speed up our decision making, right? Again, we're biasing ourselves towards action. We have to speed up that decision making process, right? And this kind of in this section I go into there's 5 roughly techniques that we use to really start doing that. And this is just like a practice that you get into as you're moving through environments. And you've described it yourself as it just comes naturally to you. But people that don't have, that never developed that natural process, we gotta walk them through it, right? So you want to proactively engage with your surroundings. Right.
I got to interject that. I just put myself in the frame of somebody who didn't have that. While you're talking, I just tried to imagine
Yeah.
if I didn't have this.
Yeah.
How I would feel. That's a very disconcerting feeling.
Yeah. Imagine how entitled you would feel and how anxious you would feel all the time if you didn't have any of this stuff.
Oh, it's worse. It's that when things happen, they're more dramatic.
Yeah, you have no proportionality to respond to them.
You know, and you feel like they're unavoidable, or you're the victim.
I mean, I look at the whole millennial cohort, and I view them through that frame. They don't have this stuff. They never learned or developed any of this. We have a whole generational cohort that is lacking this entire skill set.
Like I remember I was waiting outside of the YMCA for my mom to pick me up, right? Which is the story of my fucking life. When I was looking,
Right.
YMCA because I've been to a karate lessons, right? Waiting for this, and this guy comes up in the car, tries to get me to come in the car with him, and I'm like, what? No, get back inside, whatever. But it didn't frighten me because I knew what to do.
Right.
But now today they teach this as de rigueur, but they're not like they teach about that's a rarity, right? But what about the stuff that's like pervasive threat environment you're in that they're not teaching you about?
Right. Well, and I was just posting about this yesterday, but we're teaching people nowadays. We teach them don't judge. When what we should be teaching them is how to judge.
Yes.
And that's what this is doing, right? We, with the best of intentions, we're destroying people's ability to navigate risk because we're destroying people's ability to recognize threats. If you can't recognize a threat, you can't navigate risk.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's just that you either get lucky or not, or you get your face smashed. That's the only way to navigate risk at that point. If you have no way to identify threats or risks. So
I got a lot out of this, this chapter. When I first started it, I'm like, I was mostly concerned about how people would not understand what you were trying to get across.
Yeah.
And once I got over that hump, I felt, okay, now I understand what you're getting across. But I can like intellectually experience it and then feel it are two different things.
Yeah.
It wasn't until we got the end. So then we go through it's just basically 4 steps, right? And you can do that and learn how to respond to it. And then you start going back into, but what's it like? But then you made me think about what is it like for people who are basically feel powerless?
Yeah.
I mean, I started carrying a gun when I was like this.
Right. Yeah.
As young as I was able to.
We've got generations now that don't have any experience of any of this stuff.
And so no wonder they feel like the man is after them, so to speak, but no wonder they feel powerless.
Yeah, and they feel oppressed about everything. They're sitting on a college campus with a high-end computer that was purchased for them, talking about their oppression. Now, if you understand what I'm talking about here today, you understand how they can be in that state.
Yes. Yeah.
This chapter here and the stuff that I'm talking about in here, it's a big source of the compassion that I have for the people that were antagonistically engaged with. It's because I could recognize what it means to not have this frame.
And yet, I guess problem for me and my generation is we take it for granted.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, one of my friends down the hall was on the hall. He was a Navy guy, right? Submarines and all that shit, right? He's like, he's a good looking guy. He's 5'10". He's still pretty fit for an old man, even in his 70s. And they were not afraid of shit, right? But it's just odd to me the lack of my focus wasn't on this. I didn't I know you're always the one ahead of me in all this personal stuff, but I mean he is, but for the audience, he's just way ahead of me in anything that's bottom up at all. But so I always think about it as, well, we've removed adversarial competition from life,
Right.
which you don't realize makes men not give a shit about life. Because that's what we learn. Like girls they want to please you. You know, we need something to give a damn about, and it's basically winning.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you remove threat awareness from that same cohort, then you make them all children.
Or you say defense of the commons is illegal.
Right.
Which is what's happened to them, right? They've not only said that they're not aware of it, but even defense of the commons is illegal. Then you get men who don't give a
we're actively undermining this stuff and wondering why dysfunction is emerging from people not having it.
I go back to dates, you'll wonder why women can't find men they like.
Right. Yeah, or why it's such a hostile dating world, right? Nobody can navigate it because nobody has the skills to navigate any of this stuff.
Women who are trying to be men and failing.
Yeah.
And men who are trying to be women and failing, and wonder why that's all fucked up.
Yeah.
All right.
So in this faster, smarter decision making process, I have these 5, I don't know, actions that I like to walk people through, and I introduce them in the book, right? So it's progressive or proactively engage in your surroundings, right? Get back to paying attention, right? And that's that baseline, right? And then focus broadly first, so get that feel of the environment, and then as anomalies emerge, focus on narrow that focus down to what the anomaly is, right? So broad and then narrow, then back to broad, and then back to narrow and back to broad, right? So it's this like breathing in your environment, right? As far as being connected to it. Identify those changes or deviations, what we call anomalies, and don't dismiss them, right? These are all active processes in speeding up your decision-making process. And then gather just enough information to act. We want to get to a point where we're making those 70% informed decisions rather than waiting for that 100% of information, because oftentimes that means it's too late for you to be responding and you're going to be forced to react.
Yeah.
So we want to be biasing ourselves to actually get to that 70%. You're gonna get it wrong, especially when you're starting to practice stuff. You're gonna get it wrong.
But you're gonna cover this deeper in the book, right?
Absolutely. We cover this over and over again.
Yeah, I don't.
And then the last of these 5 points is just to make reasonable and adaptable inferences that are leading to action, right? So we're making a lot of inferences based on these anomalies. We're not doing certainty here. We're doing prediction. We're doing inference, right? And so that's the big key. And then you just keep cycling through this, and as your perception gets more accurate, your decisions will get faster and faster, right? Start building that perceptual fitness. Let me go back to where I was in the process here.
Deepening context on denial and dismissal.
Yeah, deepening context. So this is where I introduced the concept of file folders, right? So we want to pull from our own experience as much as possible, but we also want to pull from other relevant sources of experience as well. We want quality examples from quality sources, right? So we want to watch, the experts do their thing. We want to learn from the experts about how they navigate different threats in different environments. We want to store that in our head as one of the file folders we can extrapolate from, right? But we don't want to use the action movie as that expertise, right? That's not.
I have seen so much of that in my life. It's ridiculous.
Right. So that's what I mean by quality examples, right? So we want to, I use myself as an example in a lot of book. What I'm hoping I'm contributing to there is 2 people's file folders. They can extrapolate from my experiences in addition to their own, right? So you want to find as many sources for that as you can, as many sources that are providing demonstrable feedback that's applicable, that you can extrapolate from, just to deepen those file folders. Okay. And that's what I mean by deepening context. Just get as many sources for that as you can, but make sure they're quality sources. And then on denial and dismissal, it's the enemy of situational awareness. And this is we're conditioned to do a lot of this stuff, right? And some of it's just a natural response. We're pattern makers, right? We want to fit things into patterns. We want to be able to have things conform to our expectations, right? We have a sense making process that we want to apply to all of our experiences. This plays against us in
normal optimism bias.
Yeah. You hear the bang in the background and you're going to think it was a firework or it was a car backfire or something like that, rather than thinking that's a potential threat to me. We immediately want to fit it into our existing state rather than change our state to match the input, the anomaly. And that's what we ought to be doing, is changing our state to match the anomaly rather than trying to force the anomaly to fit our current state. One of the examples I use is, they had that in Wisconsin, they had that guy drive through the parade. and kill a bunch of people, right? If you listen to the audio of that, if you listen to some of the recordings and you hear some of the eyewitnesses afterwards talk about what their experience was, you can hear the tone of the crowd change when the car is down the road and it enters the parade area. You can hear the screams change from cheers and joy to fear, and there's an audible change in pitch of the sounds that are coming, right? But people are still dismissing it and just thinking, oh, they're just cheering. It must be, Santa Claus at the end of the parade showed up or something like that. So people got even more excited rather than recognizing the change in the tone of the sound coming, right? They're not responding to the anomaly at all, right? So they're just dismissing it and they're denying it. And they're trying to fit it into their sense-making pattern, right? And we need to get ourselves out of the habit of doing that in order to get good at situational awareness. And that's what I mean by denial and dismissal. That's what I'm pointing out there, is that we have this innate habituation to sense make our inputs. But we need to stop doing that and recognize anomalies as anomalies and address them from our statefulness rather than from our sense making, right? So then I go into a situational awareness exercise, and it's just I use the coffee shop example here again because I want people to go and actively practice.
There's all these naked people in there again.
What's that? Yeah, hopefully, right, that's the goal. We want to.
I like this. I like this exercise. It's interesting.
Right. Yeah, but the goal here is just really to get people in a familiar environment to concentrate on what a baseline is, right? And then do that a couple times and see what's different from your assessment of the baseline today versus the next time you do an assessment of the baseline, right? So let's practice intentional baseline.
Let me ask you a question. People seem to be pretty good when they're walking down the street and there's somebody coming their direction.
Yeah.
Where are they not good?
Everywhere else. when the interaction,
any environment they presume is secure that is not.
Yes, yeah, and we presume way more environments are safe than actually are. Because we have this conceptualization and this perception that safety has been outsourced, has been offloaded onto others, that they're going to keep us safe, so that permits us a level of disconnect from our environment, and that's just not true. It's just not accurate. The only safety we ever have is the safety we carry with us in the form of competence or tools or both. Ideally both, but
I like 45 caliber tools
right,
myself.
exactly. So do I. Like 45 caliber safety as well. I think very good number for safety. But that's one of the other hurdles that I'm trying to overcome with this, is that this is a comment that I make online quite frequently, is that the victim of the violent attack is the first responder. Yes. To that interaction, right? We have this idea that the first responder is there keeping us safe and all that kind of stuff, and fortunately, it's a huge benefit that norms exist and that most people's behavior is predictable, right? But that doesn't change the fact that anomalies are ever present and that threat and risk is ever present, and not just some human being consciously deciding to attack you. We're surrounded by dangerous things all the time, and being oblivious to that is insane. Because you're not, your brain is not oblivious to it. So your consciousness might be oblivious to it, but your brain is inputting all of those risks around you all the time. And if you're not capable of navigating that, you have no foundation of competence to navigate that, then that all of that input is going to, we were talking about earlier, it's going to accumulate in the form of stress. And it's going to manifest as dysfunction. It's going to manifest as the anxiety, as the depression, as the helplessness, as the dependence that I talk about all the time, right? We're in this delusion of outsourced safety. We've really made ourselves perpetual dependents on people that aren't even there to provide this safety. They're not even there. I mean, you call the cops, it's going to be minutes before they arrive.
Yeah, I always think that's interesting. Is it? I lived in the south end of Hartford for a while in college, which is pretty much a no-go zone, right? And for some reason, there was a dormitory that used to be used by a medical school there, and so we were having, you could get a single if you would live there, and I wanted a single because of my girlfriend or whatever. So so I live down there, and the stress those people live under, the constant stress,
Yeah.
right? And then you see some fucking did I just swear again? I try not to. Some well-meaning fool, usually a white woman, makes some opinion about how, you don't understand why people need guns or whatever. You live in an oblivious little protected bubble. You're absolutely clueless, right, about what other people's conditions are. And it's not, and what you're saying is that you're the judge of the safety of their condition.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
just not fair. I mean, that's not fair to them because they do live in a continuously threat. I mean, the pharmacist, I remember the pharmacist getting shot, right? Probably my age at the time he got shot, right? The pharmacist getting shot, and it went through his shoulder, so he was fine. And talking about him afterwards, it's like, well, why do you stay here? Well, it's because I don't want to surrender my territory to evil, right? And I thought that was a pretty moral way to take it.
Right.
But anyway, so situational awareness. You're saying what I hear this particular woman in my head saying is Karen, is like, you think you're average, you think your experience is normal, you think that what you feel is what other people should feel.
Right.
And I mean, I think the most arrogant, ignorant, numbskull and dangerous in the world.
Right.
So,
but I think a lot of times that person in that, that Karen that's expressing that type of thing, they can only do that because they're completely oblivious to everything we've talked about today as well.
Correct.
They don't have this skill set, so they can't apply this in their evaluation of other people's experiences either. They can't empathize with any of it because they don't have this foundation in place.
All right, I was trying to think how many other situations. I mean, take the other one. So the world, I would say the world I lived in, right? It's not like these law and police show and law, or no, excuse me, these law firm arguments that are in the movies, right? People are assholes. There's a lot of lying going on. Nobody's all that cunning when they're saying anything, right? It's highly manipulative, highly deceptive. And the judges aren't, and the prosecutors and the lawyers aren't that smart, right? It's way more trashy than it comes across. And I'm not going to name names, but I have had some of the best law firms in the country work for me at some point or another, and you would believe the shit they suggest to you. So, I mean, this kind of thing, it doesn't matter if you're in the north or south end of Hartford, or you're in the, you're in a coffee shop in an urban area, or you're happen to be in a bank at a suburban bank or shopping center, or all the way up to the halls of justice. There's the same problems everywhere. It's just that if you live an adequately boring and irrelevant life, you're not in any of those conflict environments.
Right. Yeah, and you've gotten lucky to avoid conflict anywhere else.
I mean, most the stuff that's interesting or weird in the world, right, happens in conflict environments.
Yeah. Well, no organism changes when it's comfortable.
Right.
So all of evolution is antagonistic.
So anyway, all right. So I enjoyed our talk today. I think that's it, right?
Yeah, that's that chapter.
Right.
Again, it's just
I
think it's
I
one
felt
of
like
the
I
most
was rushing a little bit, but I'm like, I want to stay under an hour and a half, and I know that we're going to go 2 if we don't. But
right.
I'm sorry if I rushed you a little bit.
No, it's good. It's good. It's just this is a big one. This is kind of foundational to a lot of the other material in the book, right? And but it's also, just to reiterate, it's not just a threat skill. It is a human interaction skill. It's a human skill. It's a foundational human skill. This ability to establish baselines. We wouldn't be human without it.
Yes. Well, I thought I was going to close the discussion earlier, so I summarized what I thought already. Right. I don't want to repeat myself, but I got a lot out of this, and it was very different from what I thought it's very different from what I thought when reading the book, and it's different from what I thought going in.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. This is
Absolutely.
really fascinating.
Yeah, I
All right.
appreciate you spending the time with me today. So
All right. So this is, the links to his book and everything, all his business is gonna, will be in the text below. And thanks for watching.
thank you.